hello and welcome. You're with the News Today, India's primetime destination. Newsmakers, talking points. The big talking point tonight, the major ruling by the Supreme Court. It has rejected a plea for allowing same-sex marriages. What exactly did the Supreme Court say? We'll have that big story. Has the court passed the buck to Parliament? Is our big talking point with top lawyers and activists. But first, as always, it's time for the 9 headlines at 9. No right to marry for same-sex couples, rules the Supreme Court. Puts the onus on Parliament instead, but by a unanimous verdict says state legislatures are free to enact own laws to legalize same-sex marriage. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows total annihilation of Hamas as it prepares for a full frontal ground assault in Gaza. US President Joe Biden to visit Israel on Wednesday. War-hit Gaza plunges into a deeper humanitarian crisis with nearly 3,000 deaths from Israeli airstrikes alone. Gaza hospitals overflow. Displaced residents flock for water, medicine, shelter. Israel-Hamas theatre of war widens. Rockets fired from Lebanon's Hezbollah towards Israeli territory after Israel claims it killed its commander and destroyed Hezbollah terror pads. Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla sends BJP MP Nishikant Dubey's cash for query complaint against TMC MP Mahua Moitra to the Ethics Committee. Moitra hits back, files a civil defamation suit against the BJP MP. Congress gears up for the big Madhya Pradesh battle by releasing a manifesto promising 27% reservation for OBC's 25 lakh health insurance cover for all, as well as an IPL team for the state. ISRO to hold Gaganyaan mission's test flight on the 21st of October. Narendra Modi sets 2035 target to establish an Indian space station. ICE sending first Indian astronaut to the moon in 2040. Veteran Wahida Rahman honoured with the Dadasaheb Phalke Award at the 69 National Film Awards. Alia Bhatt and Kriti Sanon bagged Best Actress, while Pushpa star Allu Arjun gets Best Actor. And 2 Swedish nationals are killed in a Brussels shootout. Police shoot the dead suspect. French President Macron warns all European states vulnerable to terror threats. Tonight's top story comes from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has passed a major verdict today. The major verdict is on same-sex marriages, where a 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court by a 3-2 verdict said that the law doesn't recognize same-sex marriages. Same-sex couples cannot enter into a civil union. No adoption rights for same-sex couples. Central government will set up a committee to study all factors, but states can pass a law in the absence of a central law. So effectively, the court has said no to the demand made by the petitioners to allow same-sex marriages. That's our big story today, and I want to break down this story in a moment to first understand the most frequently asked questions after the court made that major ruling today. To explain those, I'm joined by Nalini Sharma. Nalini is our head of law today, and therefore will give us a sense of the legal frequently asked questions. Nalini, question number 1. Is there a fundamental right to marry? The court seems to have ruled that you don't have a fundamental right to marry. Can you explain what exactly did the court say?
Well, Rajdeep, this has been unanimously said by all 5 judges that any right to marry either accrues out of a statute or the customs of a particular religion. For example, your Hindu Marriage Act, your Special Marriage Act, your Foreigners Marriage Act. So any right that is sought to be enforced by a citizen is a right to get married under a particular statute. The Constitution in itself does not recognize a fundamental right to marry, which is why couples that have approached the Supreme Court, the petitioners that have approached the Supreme Court, cannot claim a fundamental right to marry and seeking to enforce.
So they have to, effectively they're saying the Hindu Marriage Act or the Special Marriage Act is, as it stands, which says husband and wife very specifically,
yes,
does not give you a fundamental right to marry if you are a gay couple.
Yes, and that's absolutely what this is.
Okay, let's turn therefore to the second question. Can same-sex couples, Nalini, enter civil unions? What exactly did the court say?
Well, on this particular aspect, there was a split decision, where on one side, the Chief Justice of India, Dr. D.Y. Chandrachud, and Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul said that civil unions should be recognized as a right for same-sex couples, but the majority of the bench, that's Justice Ravindra Bhatt, Justice Hema Kohli, as well as Justice P.S. Narasimha, said that in the absence of a law, no civil union can really be recognized. So although it was a progressive judgment from the minority of the bench, where they wanted to recognize some sort of a civil union, give some ancillary rights to the same-sex couples, but considering that the majority did not hold the same view, the Supreme Court in a 3-2 verdict on the aspect of civil unions has said that no civil unions rights regarding that can be given to same-sex couples.
So the minority judgment, which included in this case Justice Chandrachud, said that civil unions can be, same-sex couples can enter civil unions,
Correct.
But the majority judgment has said you cannot even enter into a contractual agreement in a sense.
Yeah.
Right?
In fact, the Chief Justice of India went to the extent of saying that civil unions should be recognized and the rights corresponding to it should be granted to same-sex couples. But considering his was a minority view, it doesn't make much of a difference on the ground.
Okay, let's come to a third very contentious issue which was also raised in the course of the judgment. Can same-sex couples adopt children? What exactly has the court said on this contentious issue?
Well, Rajdeep, again, there was a split decision on this between the bench where, again, in the minority, the Chief Justice of India and Justice Kaul very progressively said that despite the fact that there is no legal right for same-sex couples to get married, they should be allowed to adopt children. Because as things stand currently, even somebody who is single can adopt a child legally. But at the same time, what the majority of the bench has said is that in the absence of a law and till the time you do not give them a legal right regarding marriage or some sort of a union, they cannot be allowed to adopt. And the reasoning given by the majority bench behind this is that in a marriage, things are more stable for an adopted child. For example, even if a married couple wants to split, then the divorce takes a certain amount of time. It's not granted immediately. But in a relationship that's not legally recognized, there is a little bit of instability, and also the child can face some sort of an exclusion, which is why it should not be included.
Okay, that's again by a majority judgment, 3-2. Let's turn to the fourth question. Can same-sex couples cohabit? Can you cohabit without marrying? What did the court say?
Well, on this, Supreme Court has reiterated things that they've earlier said, not just in the homosexuality judgment, but also in the right to privacy judgment, where they've spoken extensively about the rights of couples in a same-sex relationship. They've said not only do you have the right to cohabit, you have the right to choose your partner, you have the right to live together. They've also gone to the extent of saying that you have the right to celebrate your union. But as to whether or not that's going to be a marriage is not it's not something that the Supreme Court's gone ahead and allowed, but they've categorically said that they should have all of these rights to be able to live together, to be able to cohabit together, to be able to choose their partner and also celebrate their union. But they've fallen short of giving them a legal right to actually get married.
Interesting. The fifth and final question that is being most frequently asked, Nalini, is this. Is the Special Marriage Act unconstitutional? What is the court saying on that?
Well, it's very interesting what the Chief Justice of India said. Now, all of the 5 judges have agreed on this, where they've said that the Special Marriage Act is not unconstitutional. And what the Chief Justice of India in his judgment has gone ahead and said is that if the Special Marriage Act is declared as unconstitutional, then we will actually be sending India back to a pre-independence era. Because it's a very progressive legislation that comes to the rescue of a lot of people across religious lines, across caste lines. People who under other statutes cannot get married often resort to a Special Marriage Act and they can get married in that. So considering that if it's declared unconstitutional, then it will be setting back India back to the pre-independence era, and it will be a progressive legislature that will be struck down by the Supreme Court. So keeping that in mind, they've categorically said it's not unconstitutional. It talks about marriage between a man and a woman, and it's not up to the Supreme Court to change that.
Let me then turn to the sixth and final question, Nalini. Can the Supreme Court grant legal recognition to same-sex marriages? Or does it flow from the first question that once I've said that you cannot, under the present law, constitutionally have same-sex marriages, can I be granted legal recognition at all?
Well, Rajdeep, this question is based on the doctrine of separation of powers. And that's what the Chief Justice of India had actually begun his judgment with. And I think it set the tone for the entire judgment that was pronounced after. And what he said is that all of the duties of each arm of the state are very categorized in separate compartments, and no arm of the state can actually overlap something that the other arm of the state is supposed to do. So it's not up to the government, it's not up to the court to go ahead and pass a judicial order that recognizes same-sex marriages, but at the same time, the government can of course grant legal recognition to it by enacting a law in the parliament that recognizes men and men relationships in marriages and women
So parliament and state governments importantly have the powers to effectively legislate on same-sex marriages. A small window in that sense has been opened. Will parliament and states do it? Another question, Nalini, which has come up just now, do transgenders have the right to marry?
Well, the Supreme Court is very clear on that. All the judges, again, unanimously have said, yes, transgenders do have a right to marry, because as the law stands currently, any man, any cis man and any cis woman can get married as long as it's a bride and a groom. So even within the LGBTQ community, if there is a man that wants to get married to a woman, there's no restriction on that, because the law allows for a marriage between a man and a woman. But as to when it comes to same-sex couples, then the Supreme Court, of course, has not gone.
So a very narrow definition of the word man and woman, or husband and wife, as pronounced in the Acts itself, is what has prevailed, it would seem. But the window opened for Parliament to decide whether it wants to legislate, and state legislatures on same-sex marriage. Nalini Sharma, for joining me there off law today, giving us a sense of, or decoding that judgment for us. I appreciate you joining us. I'm going to widen this, because remember, there are petitioners whose virtually staked their reputation on this, same-sex couples who were insisting that they be given the right to marry, as it is the case in several other countries of the world. Let's raise the big questions then. Supreme Court ruling, is it conservative or is it appropriate? Has the Supreme Court simply passed the buck to Parliament? Can states now pass same-sex marriage laws? What next, therefore, in the fight for LGBTQ rights is what I'm going to raise today. Joining me now, Anjali Gopalan. We spoke to her a little while ago. She's one of the petitioners in the case from the NAS Foundation. Mahesh Jetmalani, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court, joined me from London earlier. Satvik is a petitioner and an economist based in Canada. He's someone who's been raising this issue for years now. Arvind Narayan is advocate and author, Queer, Despise Sexuality, Law and Social Change. And Anand Grover, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court, who's been championing LGBTQ rights for years. I'll come to you, Mr. Grover, first, because you can... let me first, therefore, take it to Anjali Gopalan. Anjali, as someone who's been fighting for this, a petitioner, what is your first reaction to the Supreme Court verdict? Is it a blow, or do you see some positives in the judgment that came today?
Look, it's really disappointing, at least for me. It's terribly disappointing. Not only did this not get accepted, but you didn't even have any kind of rights given to the community. So overall, very disappointing, and I think a very big blow to the movement. Do I see any positives? Well, couple of positives. I think the two things that I would say are positive is that at least the court has expanded the definition of discrimination. So, and they have very clearly told the government as well as the police how they need to conduct themselves. So that was a good thing. The other good thing that happened was around the transgender issue, where the courts were very clear that, look, transgender people can marry other transgenders or cisgender people, which means, for example, a trans woman can marry a heterosexual man, or a trans man can marry a heterosexual woman, which means then they get all the benefits that people in a married relationship get. So these are the two things, I think, that came out of the judgment today. But otherwise, it was very disappointing. Not only that, this complete wiping out of this whole issue of adoption. There are so many children lying around in adoption agencies without a good home. So completely to deny the community adoption, not only that, couples in our country cannot adopt. Couples who are living in a live-in relationship cannot adopt children, whereas single people can. So, I mean, you are denying this right to so many children just lying around without a good home. So, yeah, it's been very disappointing, I think, overall.
How do you see, Mahesh Jetpalani, this 5-judge bench? You're both a member of parliament as well as a Supreme Court senior advocate. Do you see it as a conservative judgment reflecting in a sense that the court has been extremely cautious? Or do you believe the court has simply gone by separation of powers and says, this is all that we can do under existing laws, it's for parliament to enact it, and therefore it's a legally, politically correct judgment, but nevertheless a conservative one?
I see it as a judgment according to law, because the judgment does not either repel or accept that there's a right to marry. Right? It says there's no constitutional right to marry. The right to marry is not a fundamental right arising out of the Constitution. That's what all 5 judges have said. Right? 2 of them have said that the right to a civil union, right, is a constitutional right. But the majority judgment has said not even the right to a civil union is a constitutional right. Now, in that event, right, what the court has said, what the court means is that, look, if this was a matter, a constitutional issue, if this right flowed from the Constitution, then we could give relief to the LGBTQ community. But since it doesn't flow from the Constitution in our view, right, then this can only be conferred. The right to marry, same-sex marriage, can only be conferred by statute. And for that, it is Parliament and the government which will have to introduce legislation in order to bring in the right to marry for people belonging to same sex.
You know, in a sense, what you're saying is because the court's original premise was that the right to marry is not a fundamental right, from that, in a sense, the rest of the judgment flows, or at least the majority judgment. Anand Grover, did the court get it wrong? Did the majority judgment, by denying a constitutional right to marry, in a way, wasn't willing to go far enough?
Well, I think the court has got it wrong. I don't think we made enough of grounds in terms of our argument to convince the court. And I think a future court can be convinced. See, the courts have interpreted the Constitution very liberally. For example, under Article 21, there's no explicit right to dignity, privacy, etc. The courts have interpreted that. Now, just take a layman's example. Suppose tomorrow Parliament was to say that we are actually forbidding anybody to marry. Just imagine that. What would a lawyer do? He would or she would go to court and say, no, there's a fundamental right to marry. And would the court deny that? A converse of what has happened would obviously make it amply clear that there is in fact a fundamental right to marry. And that also flows from international law, which we are bound by.
No, where does this fundamental right to marry flow from our Constitution? How does it flow from our Constitution?
So let me explain that. As I said, they are not explicit rights. They are interpreted by the court. So under Article 19 and 21, we can say there is a right to intimate association, a fundamental right from which it flows. So it's an interpretive exercise. A large number of rights have been interpreted and read into the Constitution by the courts. And they could have done it, but they haven't done it. That's what happened in the US and the right to marry. The other disappointing thing is that, please understand, what is happening? There is discrimination against non-heterosexual couples. What is happening after Navtej Johar? They were told very clearly that you can have sex, consensual, in private. There's nothing wrong with it. Now, the next step is that why can't a non-heterosexual couple marry like anybody else? So if you tell them you can't marry, you're treating them as second-class citizens. It's so clearly, manifestly evident. So there is discrimination, and therefore the court should have stepped in and said, no, there is a fundamental right.
So you're saying it falls foul of right to equality. You're saying it falls foul effectively of the right to equality, and the right to
Yeah.
live with dignity. Am I correct?
Yeah, dignity and intimate association.
Okay.
That the court has accepted. My argument, which I posited before the court, Justice Chandrachud has accepted the right, fundamental right to intimate association, privacy, dignity, equality, and right to intimate association. But you are right that they have said no fundamental right, and everything flows from that. That's the correct logic.
Okay.
In the judgment.
Can I
Only I say something if I can.
I'll just stop you for a moment, Anand, because I want to go to Satvik. He's interesting. He's a petitioner, economist based in Canada. And correct me if I'm wrong, Satvik, you chose to leave India because same-sex marriages were not recognized. Today, do you feel let down? And are you someone who will therefore never return to India till you are granted the right legally of a same-sex marriage?
Thanks, Rajdeep. No, the judgment today was extremely disappointing for me at a personal level. But, in a strange sense, it vindicates the decision that I took 3 years ago, the very hard decision to leave my friends, my family, my social network, my professional network, and start a new life in my mid-30s, halfway across the world, far away from everyone and everything that I know. And I am not a legal expert, but I am an economist, and I can tell you that my situation is symptomatic of a much larger phenomenon that has been studied in the economic literature. It's called sexual migration. It's called the gay brain drain. And it describes situation where people like myself, well-educated people who are the most likely to contribute to the upliftment of the country, to the development of the country, these are the people who are most able to get up and leave. These are the people that you don't want to leave, and these are the people that are most able to go to places where they do have the ability to live a life of dignity. And there are a myriad of economic consequences that flow from not conferring equal rights to LGBTQ community. And if you allow me to go into some of this, the number of lost working hours, there was a World Bank report that estimated that the number of lost working hours to just 3 things, increased rates of suicide, depression, and HIV amongst the community, might be losing India as much as 1.3% of its GDP. If you add on the fact that LGBTQ people, because of social pressures, aren't as productive when they do work, that might go up to as much as 1.7% of GDP. There are correlations that have been documented between affording equal rights to people and worker productivity in general, profitability, per worker output, innovation. Cities that afford equal protection are cities which are successful in attracting FDI, foreign investment. So there's this entire question of the LGBTQ tourism industry that India loses out on. So, the cumulative effects on the country are felt not just by people like me, although, we feel it the most, but it is actually being felt by absolutely everyone.
So are you giving up? Are you therefore giving up the fight in a way? Has this judgment meant that, now there will be no fight left to push for same-sex marriage, given that it's taken so long even to reach here?
Absolutely not, Rajdeep. The march forward is inevitable. We might stumble, we might fall, but we get back up and we push on. This means that it will take longer to get to full equality, but we will get there. There is no doubt about it.
Arvind Narayan, as an advocate and author of Queer, a book which looks at the challenges which the LGBTQ community has faced, do you believe today is a huge setback from which the community will struggle to recover? Are you hopeful that Parliament in particular, which has been given an opportunity now, and state governments will pass legislation? Or is this a subject that many don't want to touch?
Rajdeep, a little bit of a context. The last battle we had took 17 years, the question of decriminalization. The marriage debate has been on for only 3 years. So I see this as a bit of a long-term process, and we will finally get there. I agree with Satvik on that particular point. And in terms of, if you think of what Martin Luther King had to say, if the arc of the moral universe may be long, but it bends towards justice. That is our hope. That's the direction in which we see things going. Even on the particular thing of this particular judgment itself, even if you go to the Justice Chandrachud's judgment and Anand Grover's articulation of the recognition of the right to intimate association under Article 19C, that's an important step forward. And again, he had one other judge with him. What we missed is the third judge. So my point is simply this. At this current moment, on the question of adoption, on the question of the recognition of the right of relationship or the civil unions, the opinion was a minority opinion. But the minority opinion is not always a minority opinion. I'd like just to remind you of the opinion of in ADM Jabalpur, Justice Khanna's very, very important dissent, where the point that he made, a dissent in a court of last appeal is the appeal to the brooding spirit of the law and to the intelligence of a future day. We're convinced that the intelligence of the future day will arrive, and we're convinced that at this current moment, the idea of marriage equality is at best, in the words of a very, very well-known gay poet, Langston Hughes, it's only a dreamed effort. We will arrive at the day sooner rather than later.
I'll come to you again in a moment, or to all of you. Mahesh Jethmalani, among the questions I asked Mahesh was, do you see Parliament, you're an MP, actually acting on this? Because, the fact is Parliament did not for the longest time even act on decriminalizing homosexuality. The courts had to push them. Our politicians are resistant to decriminalizing homosexuality, almost seem to see this as a subject they don't want to enter a certain conservatism. And are they a step behind civil society then when it comes to gay rights?
Look, now let's be fair to Parliament. Since you've first taken on the Supreme Court, now as far as Parliament is concerned, it's not the end of the matter. The Supreme Court is not the end of the matter, right? While one door has been shut, Rajdeep, a second door has been opened. Right? They've called upon the union government to constitute a high-level committee. There are many interests in society. When you pass legislation, you can't be prescriptive. You have to be sensitive. The whole principle of good legislation is the greatest good for the greatest number. Right? This is a legislator's maxim. Right? So you have to take into account not just your own personal predilections on an issue, but also the opposite view. You at least got to hear them. You've got to give them natural justice.
Sure.
Now there are many interests. The conservative Hindus, the All India Muslim Law Board, conservative Christians. They were all represented, and so most of the religions, organized or not, right, really had a view against. They had a very conservative view, and they were against this. Now they all have to be heard. This is a country which is teeming in religiosity. So you have to hear those parties and then take a fair view. And I think Parliament, has a broad, extremely fair outlook. But don't taint all politicians with the same brush.
No, I'm not painting all politicians in the same brush, but I get the sense, Mr. Jethmalani, that Parliament appears reluctant to legislate on these contentious issues. And to that extent, are you a step behind civil society and, dare I say, other legislatures around the world?
Well, let me tell you, the Supreme Court has nudged them. By constituting that high-level committee, there's a nudge. Look into the matter. All right? So there is a nudge. Now, whether the views of parliamentarians, right, are liberal or they take the conservative view and do not break from the past is a matter. I wouldn't prejudge the issue. If now the matter is squarely in Parliament's court, as it always should have been, frankly. It is in Parliament's court. The court would be legislating had they gotten to this. So I think the Supreme Court gives a fair construction. Coming to Parliament, I think that you should give Parliament, instead of foreclosing it by saying Parliament has been a step behind. After all, Parliament's composition keeps changing. This is not going to be decided by this Parliament if you think that you might get a more liberal Parliament. You got now, in future, you even have 1/3 reservation for women coming up post 2026. So you may get a more sensitive Parliament. So far, you haven't had one. And by the way, all politicians are not the same. The Congress government in 2013 opposed the judgment. They went into appeal and said 377 should not be decriminalized. The BJP government left it to the court. We said, look, no view when it came up for a second time, and it was reviewed. So you never know.
No, I never know. But what is the view? What I want to know is what is the view of Mahesh Jethmalani? Does Mahesh Jethmalani, Member of Parliament, senior lawyer, believe Parliament should legislate and allow same-sex marriages? Yes or no?
My first instincts are yes, right? But to fulfill my duty as a parliamentarian, I would like to hear, if I was a member of Parliament when this bill was to come up or the proposal was to come up, right? I would like to hear all parties before I take a final decision.
Anand Grover, respond to that. There's a sense that, this is a contentious issue. It is diverse. It polarizes society. And therefore, you have to listen to other views. And that's what the court has done, a delicate balancing act, quite apart from saying that the right to marry is not a fundamental right.
Well, I would agree with Mahesh that you have to, that's the essence of democracy. You have to listen to everybody else. You have to convince the others of your point of view. And that is the effort that we will make, irrespective of the composition of the parliament. And I agree with him that the composition keeps changing. It'll be our endeavor, as it was earlier during the period of decriminalization of 377 and sexual relations between non-heterosexual couples, also to approach parliamentarians, state legislatures. So that door is always open. The court has said go, but we are also going to pursue legal remedies in court.
You're going to pursue further legal remedies in court?
Well, everybody is going to, may not be now, maybe in the future. There also composition changes. There also sensitization occurs. Everybody knows that over a period of time, people change their views. And that's the essence of how things happen. So since justice is on our side, I agree with Arvind and Swatik. We will win and we will get equality in marriage. We will persuade others, those who are not with us or they're inimical to us. We will show them that in our ancient societies, this was permissible. There's a wrong notion that it was not.
In fact, I want to take what you just said, Anand, to Satvik and Arvind. Satvik, you first. There's a sense that, conservative Indian society is reluctant to allow same-sex marriage. This is not the Western world. This is India. What will you tell all those people listening to you there today? Many of them have said this is an elitist issue. Today, Justice Chandrachud made it clear he didn't see this as an elitist issue. But in general, what would you tell conservative Indians who say this is the right judgment? We are not ready for same-sex marriages in this country. It will, in a way, create disruption in society.
I think that that's an extremely myopic view of the way our great civilization has evolved over the last 5,000 years. I would say to these people, go and look at your own scriptures. Go, rather than listening to other people, go and actually read what's written in those scriptures. And you'll see that there were times in our history way before modern laws, where non-heterosexual unions were not just permissible, but were celebrated. And so I would say that, let there be a national discussion. I agree with all the panelists. We need to now get down to brass tacks. We need to now have these conversations with people on the ground, and we need to change opinions on the ground. And in my personal experience, even with people who have been sort of conservative as traditionally defined, a lot of this flows from, misinformation or not having thought about this enough. And the moment you challenge people to think about this enough, very quickly, these sorts of opinions can change.
Arvind, do you believe opinions are changing, or is conservative India still reluctant to accept same-sex marriages? Do you believe in the next few years you'll be able to change my opinion as you were with decriminalizing homosexuality?
Presley, the world has changed quite dramatically. That's what I believe. If you come to our state Karnataka, we have a novelist who's writing books in Kannada for the first time called Vasudendra, writing gay stories in Kannada. And if you look at family members, again, this is indicates a big shift. We have family members, parents of LGBT persons, coming on your show and various other shows, looking, as it were, very conservative, wearing a sari, etc., making the case that we must recognize the right to marry. So what does that tell you? It tells you that there is a section of Indian population which is very ready, saying that, we need to change. And my point is simply this.
Is it a small section? Is it a small section though, Arvind? Is it, there'll be people watching this show who will say, these are marginal groups. What are you going to tell those who say that these do not represent mainstream India?
The point you'd make is, as Justice Chandrachud and Justice Kaul made the point, that the question of sexual orientation, gender identity traverses class, caste, gender, and strata, social strata. So it could be very well be possible that within your own family, your son or your daughter could be lesbian or gay, your child could be transgender, and then you'll have to cope with that reality yourself. So it's very, very important for us all to develop a broader sense of humanity and say that, this might be our reality, and we need to recognize and respect the diverse ways of living in this particular world. And that's the essence of a democracy, where you take the point very seriously that diversity is the heart of our constitutional order, and that's something we choose to respect and take forward. And if you look at Justice Kaul's opinion, he makes the point of diversity from the point of view of Indian culture as well. So if you look at, again, work by Salim Kidwai and others, they make the point that there's a history and tradition of same-sex love in this country going back to 2500 BC. That's our tradition, that's our culture. So we just need to try and get a wider awareness on these tradition and culture questions so that we convince a larger and larger number of our own people that this is the way forward.
Satvik, 17 years to decriminalize homosexuality. You're hopeful that within the next decade you'll be back in India to celebrate a same-sex union?
I was hopeful that I would be back in India tomorrow to celebrate same-sex unions. 17 years, I mean, it's a good yardstick to compare. However, I think 17 years was too long coming. I think we should have done this yesterday, but, given what's happened, I am hopeful that this will happen sooner rather than later.
Okay. That's the positive note, in a way, on which we perhaps look to the future. This is a society in transition. The conversations certainly have started, and I think the Supreme Court judgment will only further those conversations, particularly if you look at both the majority and the dissenting judgment. I think it's important to note that this was a 3:2 judgment, and therefore that reflects, in a way, the split and divides. One of the depressing parts is adoption. And I'm sure many of you would have liked to see, at least on adoption, as Anjali mentioned, greater freedom being given to same-sex couples to at least adopt children. Hopefully that at least will be the next step forward, and hopefully one day society will be open enough to also accept same-sex marriages. That's the way the rest of the world is going. Why should India be a step behind? I appreciate all my guests joining me here on this special day where that major judgment has been passed by the Supreme Court. Thank you all very much for joining me. Okay, let's turn from there to our other big story, which comes from Israel. Now, Hamas is claiming it has over 200 Israeli and foreign hostages in its captivity. Amidst this, the terror outfit also today released a chilling video of a French-Israeli hostage, Mia Shem, who was abducted during the fateful music festival near the Gaza border on the 7th of October. Israel is facing, therefore, not just the challenge of Hamas, but also a hostage crisis. How does Israel ensure hostages return safely to their families?
21-year-old French-Israeli by nationality. Mia Shem disappeared from the music festival where 260 people were killed when it came under Hamas attack on October 7th. Nine days later, the Palestinian militant group released her 60-second video. In the footage, an unidentified worker is seen treating Shem's injured arm. In another clip broadcast on Hamas's Telegram channel, Shem speaks directly to the camera in Hebrew. She says she's in Gaza, that she's being looked after. Her arm was operated on for 3 hours at a hospital, and that she wants to go home. Her mother shared her anguish and issued a fervent appeal for her release.
I'm begging the world to bring my baby back home. This is a crime against humanity, and we should all gather and stop this terror and bring everybody back home.
In a separate communication, Hamas claimed to be holding 200 to 250 people as hostages in Gaza. In his televised statement, a Hamas spokesperson said the non-Israeli captive will be released when conditions are ripe. According to the militant group, at least 22 hostages have been killed in Israeli airstrikes on Gaza.
Say Bismillah.
With Hamas showing their capability in asymmetric warfare and avoiding digital trail in their communications, Israel is faced with what probably is the toughest hostage crisis. It has a mixed recording in dealing with such situations. Israel set up a secret force in 1957. The unit shot to fame in 1976. With its raid on Entebbe to rescue hostages from a hijacked plane at a Ugandan airport. In 2011, though, Israel made big concessions to win freedom of one Israeli soldier in Hamas custody. It freed more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for the exchange. And that batch of freedom prisoners included the current Hamas leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, one of the masterminds of the October 7th carnage. In the present situation, Israel has been quick to set up a hostage situation room to collate everything about people in Hamas's captivity.
Israel says the responsibility of keeping those hostages safe and out of harm's way is Hamas leadership's responsibility. They're also saying information that 20 to 22 hostages were killed in an Israeli airstrike again is psychological warfare by Hamas, because Hamas leadership had said that they would execute one hostage a day on live TV in case Israel continued to carry out airstrike. Gaurav Sawant in Sderot near the Gaza Strip in southern Israel for India Today. So what's the way ahead? US President Joe Biden is arriving in Israel tomorrow evening. Joining me now is Michal Mayan. She's Israel's Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations in New York. Appreciate your joining us, ma'am. We are looking at this entire issue at a time when there is growing concern both about the hostage crisis as well as the unfolding humanitarian disaster in the Gaza Strip. Several UN agencies now warning that mass evacuations will have to take place because of the Israeli siege of Gaza. That could lead to disaster, and among the most vulnerable are elderly and pregnant who can't relocate. How is Israel viewing these concerns, ma'am?
First, I want to thank you for having me on the show and talking about the situation. Israel is very closely following the humanitarian situation in Gaza. We are also checking every possible venue in order to help the civilian population. I can tell you that access to water has been granted throughout the Gaza Strip, and we are also looking at possibility to allow for fuel for emergency cases. But I'd like to also share with you a recent development. We have seen reports by UNRWA of medical emergency supplies and gas being stolen from their facilities. And this is part of the problem. We are here fighting a war. This war was imposed on us by a terrorist, bloodthirsty organization that unfortunately has no quarrels in also sacrificing the life of innocent Palestinians. So we're closely following it. We're doing everything we can, but our focus is still remaining to target Hamas and take out all the facilities of their terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip.
But the fact also, Ms. Mayan, is there is a danger of this conflict getting widened. Fears being expressed that we could soon have a two-front war with the Hezbollah in Lebanon. Already there have been strikes on that side of the border as well. Countries like Saudi Arabia also making it clear that innocent Palestinian lives must not be at stake. Within the Gulf, within the Middle East, is Israel a little isolated in its plans to dismantle Hamas, or do you have full support not just from the US, but other countries as well?
Well, I would say that you can see from recent years and recent development how firm we are in our calls for peace and stability in the Middle East. And that has been shown by our commitment to promote relations with Arab countries and create cooperation for a better life for everyone in the Middle East. Unfortunately, our actions have been perceived as a threat by terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah, by terrorist sponsoring countries like Iran. We have seen in the weekend their efforts to encourage more groups to enter into this war. We discourage that. We are willing to fight for our existence, for the right to exist in the Middle East, that's what we're doing. And we will do whatever it takes. These are our goals. It is very unfortunate. We didn't want this war. It was brought to us by the events October 7th, and we will be focused in our goal. And I can actually tell you that we hear also the moderate voices of the countries in the region calling the reality for what it is. Terrorist organization Hamas has started this war in an attempt to destabilize the Middle East. We will finish it on our terms, and we will make sure there are no terrorist organizations sitting on our borders with the will and ability to attack our civilians the way they did on October 7th.
You're saying you will end this war on our terms, we will dismantle Hamas, we will destroy Hamas. What do you exactly mean, Ms. Mayan, when you say you will end this war on your terms? What are those terms?
We will go in and we will find the people responsible for the atrocities that we have witnessed. We will take out the infrastructure from within Gaza, and we will do so with every possible effort in order to minimize the harm to civilians. I will be very honest with you. If they would set the hostages free and by the way, stop firing missiles at our people, more than 6,600 missiles since October 7th. My family is still living in safe rooms. Everyone is under attack. When we're talking about humanitarian crisis, there's also a crisis in Israel where tens of thousands of people have been evacuated. This is a war. This is a horrible situation, and it will end when we get the hostages released and we dismantle the infrastructure for terror that exists right now within Gaza.
But can I ask you, in terms of sequencing, is the top priority to ensure the hostages are released? Will there then be a cessation of hostilities? Is your government even willing to negotiate with Hamas at any stage for the release of Israeli citizens and other citizens who are being held hostage?
I can tell you that my government is doing everything in its power in order to make sure that these children and women and elderly and everyone, every single person that has been taken hostage by Hamas returns safely to their families. That means every possible venue is being explored. I don't want to share more, but we will do whatever it takes.
You will do whatever it takes to ensure that the hostages return safely. Mikhail Mayan, joining me, UN Deputy, Israel's Deputy Representative to the United Nations there in New York. I appreciate you joining me here on the news today. Thank you so much. Let's turn to tonight's Good News Today story. It's festive season, Navratras are here, and soon Pujo will also be here. And where else but Kolkata can you be when it's Pujo? Among the many Pujo pandals this time which are breaking taboos surrounding, there is one which is breaking taboos surrounding menstruation. It's our Good News Today story.
This puja pandal in central Kolkata is in the news for its theme Ritumati. The pandal aims to break taboos surrounding menstruation and spread awareness about menstrual hygiene.
चांद में भी जाने के जो किया चंद्रयान किया उसमें लीड भी किया हम लोगों का इंडियन लेडी ये टैबू का हटाने का ये कोशिश है कि समाज से ये अंधकार बिल्कुल साफा हो थोड़ा ज्ञान चाहिए इस बारे में
Ilora Saha, who heads the puja committee, is the brain behind the concept.
ये है पूरा सोशल अवेयरनेस के ऊपर क्योंकि हम लोगों का इस सोसाइटी में बहुत सारा टैबूज है मतलब घर में कोई रसोई में नहीं घुस सकते हैं एक बेड पे सो नहीं सकते हैं हस्बैंड के साथ और ठाकुर मंदिर और पूजा पाठ ये तो दूर की बात है कई घर में तो उसको घर से बाहर निकलने भी नहीं दिया जाता
The Pathuri Ghata Pacher Poli has been organizing Durga Puja for 84 years. Its bold theme this year has won it many admirers. Bureau Report, India Today.
Just about enough time to leave you with our image of the day, the 69th National Film Award ceremony that took place in the national capital, the winners receiving the prestigious award from President Draupadi Murmu, and all eyes were on this wonderful lady. The one and only Wahida Rehman got the prestigious Dadasaheb Phalke Award for lifetime achievement. For anyone who's tracked Wahida Rehman's career, I can tell you there is no greater deserving honor for her than this award, for someone who has endured and delighted cinema audiences for more than 6 decades. Salute her, a teary-eyed Wahida Rehman, and we will always be grateful for her remarkable film career. I'm a great fan. Thanks for watching. Stay well, stay safe. Good night. Shubh Ratri. Jai Hind. Namaskar.
फिल्म गंगूबाई काठियावाड़ी के लिए सर्वश्रेष्ठ अभिनेत्री का पुरस्कार प्राप्त कर रही हैं अभिनेत्री आलिया भट्ट। फिल्म मिमी के लिए सर्वश्रेष्ठ अभिनेत्री के पुरस्कार की विजेता अभिनेत्री कृति सेनन, आपको रजत कमल का सम्मान। द मिमी गेट्स द अवार्ड फॉर और फिल्म पुष्पा के लिए सर्वश्रेष्ठ अभिनेता का पुरस्कार ग्रहण कर रहे हैं श्री अल्लू अर्जुन।
Pushpa, Allu Arjun for an intense, charismatic performance of an underdog challenging an entire corrupt system. Iconic role, certainly deserves another round of applause.